Wasn't easy for Georgia this past week, Dalton. They beat Georgia Tech on Friday night 44-42 in 8 overtimes. 8 overtimes, the second most overtimes in college football history, trailing only Penn State against Illinois. I forgot what year exactly it was, but Penn State and Illinois went to 9 overtimes one year. It was a hideous football game. This is a very fun football game, though, as well, with Georgia beating Georgia Tech at the very, very end of it. Let's go into the grades, starting off with the victorious Georgia Bulldogs in this one, starting off with C.J. Allen, their linebacker, 87.6 grade. Tight end Ben Urasek with a 77.1. K.J. Bolden, 69.6. Defensive tackle Nazir Stackhouse, 69.2. Another D tackle Warren Brinson, 68.9. And Carson Beck with a 75.3 grade. All right, let's go over to Georgia Tech with their highest graded players in this loss. Starting off with linebacker Kyle Effort, 79.5 grade, Ethan McKinney, the offensive tackle, with a 76.6. Makia Scott, 72.6. Eric Singleton Jr., 68.5, the wide receiver. Amari Harvey, the corner, 68.1. And Haynes King, the quarterback, 77.7 grade. Dawn, for you, the stat told story in this thrilling Black Friday game.
Okay, before we got all the twists and turns and overtimes and all of that, we have seen with Georgia Tech multiple times this year in multiple upsets that if you let them get in their wheelhouse and you let the run game get going, they can beat anybody. That's just the way their offense is. They control the football. They play the game at their pace. They dictate the pace of the game. My stat is that they held the ball in regulation for 37 minutes and 11 seconds. And that's if you don't allow an opposing team's offense on the field, they can't score. We got to remember, before all the overtimes, they had a 14-point lead with, about 6 minutes to go or so, and Carson Beck had to bring Georgia back. This was a game where in regulation, I should say, that was 90% dominated by Georgia Tech. 252 rushing yards, 5.6 per carry. 4 different players with an explosive run. Haynes King just played his absolute heart out. The offensive line was great. Jackson Hawes was great at tight end. Jamal Haynes was playing through pain. I mean, you had plays from Eric Singleton on the outside. Georgia Tech got in their wheelhouse, absolutely, and they just couldn't hold the lead in regulation when they were up by 14, and that's the part I think more than the overtimes that's going to sting the most from this is they got to play their game in Athens, up 27-13 late, running the football, controlling the clock. Everything Georgia Tech wanted to do, they went out and did it. They just didn't finish Georgia off. And that's a big thing with Georgia and Kirby Smart and Carson Beck and the pedigree is you got to finish them off if you're going to beat them. Much like Ole Miss did when they just finished them off and the game was done, they left no doubt. You have to leave no doubt that Georgia's done. Yep. And Georgia Tech, they just missed an opportunity. But for 90% of this game, this was Georgia Tech's ball game.
Yeah, it really was. And my set of the story is really the passing difference in the two halves, really a tale of two halves for these passing games. Because in the first half, Georgia, negative .294 EPA per pass. And then in the second half, .504 EPA per pass. Carson Beck, 67.4 passing grade in the first half. 80.7 passing grade in the second half. He had 5 touchdown passes in the second half and overtime with a rushing touchdown to boot as well. Georgia Tech, though, .697 EPA per pass in the first half to .276 EPA per pass, almost a third of that in the second half. Haynes King, 87.4 passing grade in the first half, 64.4 passing grade in the second half. Georgia Tech went to the locker room up 17-0. Honestly, it could have been worse than 17-0. They were outscored 44-25 in the second half and overtime. The biggest difference to me, one passing game that was ice cold heated up in the second half, and one passing game that was red hot really cooled down in the second half and overtime.
Yeah, no, I mean, Georgia, look, Kirby Smart's always going to make the adjustments, and he was even doing it in every single of the 2-point overtimes, calling a timeout before pretty much every play, right? And Kirby's the mastermind. And again, Georgia knows how to keep themselves in a game, and that's what an experienced team with the pedigree like them, can do. And I think in the playoff, that's a big factor. I think you have other teams in the playoff who haven't been through those sorts of things, and with Georgia playing in SEC championships before, national title games before. They've been in these situations. That experience in getting them through difficult situations, that plays a big factor, and I think it's going to continue to play a big factor as we get them into the playoff. Georgia could still win a national title. but they're going to have to do it with a little more grit and guile this year instead of, in past years where they were just the most talented team in college football.
Definitely. What was the most impressive part to you in this Georgia victory?
I just want to give credit to both quarterbacks, honestly. Yeah. Haynes King played his heart out. 23 carries for 111 yards and 3 touchdowns, 303 passing yards and 2 big-time throws. I mean, just a spectacular game from him. He played, honestly, outside of the fumble that Dan Jackson made the great play on.
That might have been targeting, by the way, too. Dude, that was pretty close.
There'll be arguments about it, but I mean, it's tougher. It's tougher between the tackles.
Yeah, that's true. That is true
too. And then Carson Beck, you mentioned the big second half, but to finish with 294 yards and 5 touchdowns after they got shut out in the first half. I mean, these two quarterbacks duked it out, and they did it in their own way. Beck from the pocket, King with the dual threat stuff. I mean, Georgia Tech. Well, I mean, are they 6-6 or 7-5 this year? I don't remember. But either way, Georgia Tech, with a brutal schedule this season. What a fun year they had.
7-5.
I think Brent Key needs to be given a lot of credit even just for getting them there because
he's turned that program around.
They played Florida State in Ireland when everyone thought they were going to lose. Now it looks different because of what Florida State is, but at the time they were 14-point dogs in that game, right?
Florida State was top 10 in the country.
Right. Notre Dame, they played Louisville, they played Miami and won, they played Georgia and almost won. I mean, a brutal schedule for Georgia Tech. I just have to love the way that Brent Key's got that program going. One of these years when they don't have a schedule like that, they're going to contend for an ACC title. I believe that. I love what they're doing. The improvement this year on defense, I know it didn't show in the second half of this game, but their defense was awful front to back last year. Haynes King and the development and just the run game and everything they want to do, they know their identity, and I think that's a big part of being a good football team. Georgia Tech, it's 7-5. I know it doesn't seem great on paper. I think they had an excellent season.
I mean, considering where this program was like a couple years ago, though, like 7-5, like, yeah, we'll take that. Like they were consistently missing bowl games
with this schedule. This is the ACC version of Florida. With this schedule that how we were talking about Florida going 7-5, and that was a great year of progress for them. I think it's the same with Georgia Tech. I think very soon they're going to be ACC contenders.
So from before Brent Key was hired, 2019 under Jeff Collins, when Jeff Collins was hired, 3-9, 3-7, 3-9. Then he went 1-3. Brent Key took over and went 4-4 in his first year as the interim coach. So 5-7 overall. And then 2 years under Brent Key, they're 7-6 and now 7-5 right now.
There's going to be a year where they get more talented and they have an easier schedule. They're going to contend.
So 4 straight years of not making a bowl game, and now 2 straight years of making a bowl game under Brent Key. Yeah. He's done an amazing job of turning around that program, honestly. So yeah, great, big shout out to him. And Haynes King, you're right. He was battling out there. I mean, you saw a couple times during the two-point conversion attempts, he was running the ball and he could barely get up. Like he was clearly hurting out there, but he gave it all and almost pulled off a major victory over Georgia. My most impressive part, though, the Georgia pass blocking. This has been the kind of theme for them all year. The Georgia offensive line was outstanding at pass blocking, as it's been all year. 85.9 pass blocking grade as a team. 2 sacks allowed, 6 pressures allowed on 49 snaps as well. Jared Wilson, the center, completely clean sheet. No pressures allowed, no sacks allowed, and wasn't even beaten once either. So completely clean sheet. Tate Ratledge, Xavier Truss, Dylan Fairchild, only 1 pressure allowed each. Monroe Freeling, the other tackle, 2 pressures allowed in this game. For a quarterback like Carson Beck that relies so much on clean pockets. Like, he is not good under pressure at all. He needs this kind of offensive line. If this offensive line was not there, and they had an average offensive line or below average offensive line or one like Ohio State, they would not be in the playoff right now. They wouldn't be close to being a college football playoff team. This offensive line, more so than anything else in this offense, maybe more so than anything on this team, is the biggest reason why they're still alive right now. Because if not, with Carson Beck playing the way he does under pressure, they're screwed. They would have lost multiple games without this offensive line, right? So this offensive line for Georgia has arguably been the best part of the entire team. And again, against Georgia Tech, it was outstanding.
Those interior 3 you mentioned of Ratledge, Wilson, and Fairchild, that might be the best interior offensive line in college football.
I agree.
It's just spectacular, and they're so clean on the inside. You mentioned a pocket quarterback like Beck. Very often it's interior pressure that bothers them the most, but they don't have to worry about that with this team. They just need to execute better with Beck and with the receivers and just getting the passing game rolling on the outside, but it helps when you're protected, right? Like you mentioned, the opposite of the Ohio State game where it's, okay, with Georgia, at least we're protected. At least we can execute. We have an opportunity to execute.
They don't have great weapons either, so it's like...
They don't. Yeah. They need to execute at a high level on the outside because they're not as talented out there as they have been in past years, or certainly since last year with Bowers and McConkey. That's been the story, is them overcoming a lesser talent level on the outside and Carson Beck overcoming that. But when you're protected and you give quarterbacks a mostly clean pocket, you have a chance of success.
Yeah,
Sure.
Georgia right now tied for 12th in America in pass blocking grade this year. I mean, it has been dominant for Georgia all year in terms of pass blocking. Also a pretty good run blocking unit as well. They're 35th in run blocking grade this year as well. So Georgia's offensive line, outstanding all year, and really is the reason why they're still alive right now. Because if not, with Beck, struggling to pressure, with the receiving core not being that great, this offense would be lost at the end of the offensive line. How about Jared Wilson, though, Dalton, real quick? They lost Cedric Van Pran, legendary center at Georgia, and everyone thought, oh boy, what's going to look like at center after this? Jared Wilson has been one of the best centers in college football this year. It's insane what he's been doing. So I want to shout him out because he's been unreal for them this year. When a lot of people thought after losing SVP, they're like, oh boy, it could be a really tough position for Georgia this year, and he has come in there and be an outstanding center for them.
That's a great call. And you need that guy both to be productive and be a leader, and he's done that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Georgia staying alive. They still would have been have a chance to make the playoff if they lost to Georgia Tech, because obviously all they got to do is win the SEC. But now Georgia and Texas, I would say, right, they clinched. Right now, Georgia can afford to lose to Texas next week and still make the college football playoff.
I think they're both locks. Yeah, I agree with that.
Before, if they lost to Georgia Tech, then it'd be like you have to beat Texas in order to make the playoff, probably. But not anymore. I think Georgia is safely in the college football playoff now. Hey, thanks for watching another episode of the PFF College Football Show. Please make sure you guys subscribe to the channel.
Also, subscribe to PFF Plus at subscribe.pff.com for all of the same data and grades that we use in our show, plus fantasy tools, betting tools, and our mock draft simulator.